will, if allowed, lift us out of this malaise in which we find ourselves. To put America back to work, the Senate needs to get back to work. I thank the Chair and would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam Chair,
Senator from Montana.
I ask that the quorum call be eviscerated.
Without objection.
Mr.
Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S-782, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 38, S-782, a bill to amend the Public Works and Economic Development Act of 1965 to reauthorize that act and for other purposes.
Madam President.
Senator from Montana.
Madam President, I have
Under the previous order, the time until 2 p.m. will be equally divided between the proponents and opponents of amendment number 392 offered by the Senator from Montana, Mr. Tester.
Madam President, I have 7 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record. With that, Madam President, I will yield to the Senator from Rhode Island and then do my statement.
I want to
Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Madam President. First, let me thank the Senator from Montana for yielding and also for bringing this issue to the floor. I am reluctantly opposing my dear friend, but doing so, I think on the principles that are inherent in what we try to accomplish in the Dodd-Frank legislation, and that is to provide for transparency in pricing of financial products. With that as a starting point, I will begin, but before I would ask unanimous consent that Robert Peake, a fellow in my office, be granted the privilege of the floor for the remainder of the 112th Congress.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. One aspect I think we have to consider is not just this specific amendment, but the growing attempt to undermine the ability to implement the reforms incorporated in the Dodd-Frank legislation, which are actually critical, not just to protecting consumers, but also providing a foundation for an effective financial system in the United States, which is the foundation of, I believe, a growing and thriving economy. So this debate is not just about interchange fees. It's about comprehensively dealing with the problems that we saw manifest themselves in the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, where market discipline collapsed, where great institutions, some failed and some were on the verge of failure. If they had failed, then the ramifications would not be simply restricted to Wall Street. They would have felt on Main Street, and we would be in a worse financial position than we are today. But this specific amendment deals with the interchange fees or swipe fees. And the first thing I think we have to recognize is that these are really hidden fees. They're charged in each transaction that a consumer makes using a debit card. Every time you swipe the card, which serves as an electronic check, there is a fee. But the consumer doesn't see this fee. And so basically, you have a disguised price. And if the price is disguised, then the consumer doesn't have a real indication of the cost. And if he doesn't know the cost, then that affects the rational economic decisions that we assume consumers are making every time they make an economic decision. But at the end of the day, despite the fact that the consumer is unaware of these fees, he or she ends up paying them in higher prices for gas, for milk. In fact, they've been paying these higher prices for the privilege of using a debit card for years and years and years. Debit cards are used more than checks today, more than credit cards to pay for everyday purchases. And these secret fees, in a sense, you might even describe them as hidden taxes on consumers, add up to billions of dollars a month. Now, the Durbin interchange provision of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Law sought to make these interchange fees transparent and public for the very first time. It requires that for transactions involving debit cards issued by banks with assets over $10 billion, the largest banks, not the community banks, not the credit unions, but the largest banks, that these interchange fees set by the card network on behalf of its issuing banks must be reasonable and proportional to the amount it costs to issue, the issuer rather, to conduct a transaction. And now this is the law of the land. And the Federal Reserve was given the responsibility of implementing the law through regulations, and they're on the verge of publishing those regulations. Now, Senator Durbin's proposed this provision because businesses like, in my home state of Rhode Island, Cumberland Farms, the old convenience store chain that I grew up with, it is the largest convenience store chain in Rhode Island. It is the quintessential small business, family-owned business, pays almost as much in these hidden fees as it earns each year in profits. These fees roughly equal their profits. Now, interchange fees for Cumberland Farms are their second largest expense. It's not the milk, it's not the gasoline, it's not a lot of things. It is their second largest expense. And despite the fact that the total number of gallons of gasoline, for example, that they've sold has remained flat, the interchange fees have increased 270%, from $13 million in 2003 to a projected $48 million this year. Again, prices are flat for commodities like gasoline, relatively speaking, or number of gallons, rather. The price is going up, but the number of gallons is flat, but their fees have gone up almost 270%. Now, the Cumberland Farms CEO calls this increase a runaway train. When gasoline was $2 per gallon, interchange fees were about 3 cents per gallon. Now that gas prices are about $4 per gallon, interchange fees have increased to 5 cents a gallon. So for the same 15-gallon fill-up, the hidden fees increased 63%. So the motorist, the local Rhode Island who's filling up at the local corner gas station, is paying 63% in their fees on top of the increase in the price of gasoline. The actual debit card services haven't changed, but because the price of gas increased, the fees almost doubled. That's a pretty good deal for Visa and MasterCard and the banks. Unfortunately, as these fees continue to increase, they increase gas prices, they prevent investment, they preclude new hiring. Indeed, the convenience store industry reports that overall it pays more in these fees than it's earning in profits. That's overall across the board, across the country. There's another example, a very local company, a very small business, Chocolate Delicacy in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. It pays a swipe fee on every piece of chocolate sold when paid by a debit or gift card, which amounts to 60% of their purchases. And now the owner, Marie Schaller, told me that she feels like she has no choice but to pay the fee. If I don't, I would lose over half of my sales. The growing swipe fees have meant a cutback in hiring for Marie. At the Beehive Cafe, located in Bristol, Rhode Island, a cup of coffee costs $1.75. The swipe fee is 15 cents. Because card fees are hidden and there's no availability to negotiate them, owner Jennifer Cavallero said Visa and MasterCard have inserted themselves into every single transaction that takes place, equating to a tax on commerce. This is not free enterprise. The small business person is trapped. When consumers pay for some drinks with debit cards, 7-Eleven owners in Rhode Island told me they lose money on every transaction. So why don't supermarkets, drugstores, and other merchants negotiate to pay less? Well, they really can't. The fees are set by Visa and MasterCard and the card networks. They have no bargaining power. And most merchants are left with no choice but to accept the cards. You can't play if you don't pay. In July 2010, we passed this interchange provision so that the Federal Reserve could study the fees and decide whether they are reasonable. In fact, the Federal Reserve found that they were nor proportional. The Federal Reserve found that the average swipe fee was 44 cents for every purchase, but the processing costs were less than about 12 cents per purchase, giving them a 30% gross-up on their actual cost. In December of last year, the Federal Reserve proposed rules to limit the fee to reasonable rates. The Federal Reserve's top economists are reviewing and considering over 11,000 comments on their current reasonable fee proposal. Chairman Bernanke has said that they are committed to issuing a final rule by July 21st of this year. I believe that they should be given the chance to study the 11,000 comments and complete the rule. Only by letting them do their work instead of disrupting it are we going to be able to see if the new reasonable fee structure can open up this system and make these fees more reasonable and transparent. Banks and card issuers who receive the fees have been vocal about their objection, preferring to keep the fees hidden and ever rising beyond the current 44 cents. With such a large profit margin in this line of business, most of us can understand why. MasterCard said in its annual report to shareholders, and I quote, "We are devoting substantial management and financial resources to the defense of interchange fees." Visa told its shareholders that the rules, quote, "may give retailers greater ability to route debit transactions onto competitive networks, which can reduce the processing fees we currently earn." So the credit card companies are very much aware that there could be a better competitive environment for merchants and consumers if this legislation goes through. That's what they've told their shareholders. Now, small banks under $10 billion in assets are exempt from the rules. And a survey conducted by the American Banker found that an overwhelming majority believe that the law actually helps small banks. Small banks will have a competitive advantage since their fees are not limited by the rules. Now, the United States is not alone in closely examining these fees. The European Union, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, Spain, South Africa, and Switzerland already regulate swipe fees. In addition to the ever-increasing swipe fees merchants are forced to pay for, merchants also bear the brunt of the cost of fraud, contrary to some of the assertions that the industry has made. It's my understanding that after fraud claims, networks typically raise interchange fees to the company that has engaged or been subject to the fraud, and often engage in litigation against merchants to recoup fraud losses. And of course, all of these costs, the merchant's costs and I think also the interchange costs, are passed on to consumers. There are some examples. When criminals installed scanners to obtain customer account information at Michael's, a craft store, it was only the latest theft of such consumer data. Community banks were quick to respond and immediately issued new cards and returned stolen money. However, despite paying millions in interchange fees in the recent past, Michael's may have to reimburse Visa, MasterCard, and the banks for these replacement costs. In another example, in December 2006, TJ Maxx discovered that computer hackers had broken into their computer network and had stolen customer payment card data. In March of last year, a federal judge sentenced one of the computer hackers responsible to 20 years in federal prison. Since 2006, TJ Maxx has spent about $170 million in costs related to this incident, including nearly $65 million to Visa and MasterCard to compensate banks for the cost of the fraud. This, of course, is in addition to continuing to pay their interchange fees. The same hacker who hacked TJ Maxx also hacked Heartland Payment Systems. That attack cost Heartland over $140 million, the majority of which was paid to Visa and MasterCard and other banks to compensate for the cost of the fraud. Heartland Payment System had to pay the banks and Visa and MasterCard for the computer fraud committed. So the consumer pays for the data breaches, the consumer pays for the debit card fraud, and the consumer pays more and more for interchange fees. I think any further delay in the rules to require reasonable swipe fees only harms small businesses and, in the end, the consumer. The amendment before us provides for at least a 12-month delay in the rules, in addition to a 6-month study and effectively a completely new version of the proposed rules. And I think it's unreasonable. There is no reason for delay. The Federal Reserve has what Chairman Bernanke characterized as, in his words, plenty of information from over 11,000 comments on the Federal Reserve's December 2010 rule proposal. In addition, the Federal Reserve has done an enormous amount of surveying of the industry, again, in the words of Chairman Bernanke. And the proposal before us provides for banks, I think, another way to avoid transparency in their operations. The Federal Reserve should be allowed to finish their rules to establish a reasonable fee for debit card services. And then we can work with the banking regulators to make sure that their rules do in fact work and do in fact provide for a more transparent, competitive marketplace to the benefit of merchants and consumers. Now, our market system only works well if merchants and consumers have the information they need to make informed choices. And that was what was at the heart of this provision in the Dodd-Frank Act. And that's what is at the heart, I believe, of the Dodd-Frank proposal overall, which is to provide better information, more transparency, whether it be credit card or debit cards or it be complicated derivatives. Because armed with better information, individual consumers and individual merchants can make better choices about economic decisions that will accrue to the benefit of all of us. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Madam Chairman.
Senator from Montana.
Well, I want to thank Senator Reid for his comments. Senator Reid is one of the leaders on the Banking Committee, and I appreciate his comments. I do want to set the record straight on a couple things, though. It's not a 12-month delay plus a 6-month study. It's a 6-month study and then implementation of the rules. Senator said that Chairman Bernanke had plenty of information. The problem is he doesn't have much information from community banks and credit unions, and that is what this amendment is about. The exemption that is in the amendment that we passed last year, called the Durbin Amendment, every regulator at the federal and state level has said they cannot make the exemption work because market forces will determine where the customers flow. Madam President, I'm glad that we're here to vote on the amendment that Senator Corker and Senator Hagan, Senator Crapo, Senator Bennett, and I have worked so hard on. This afternoon, we're finally going to have an opportunity to vote for an amendment that has been crafted the right way. Senators Hagan and Crapo and Bennett came to Senator Corker and I about a month ago to share their interest in fixing the unintended consequences of that amendment that was passed in the Senate about a year ago. The amendment directed the Federal Reserve to issue regulations limiting the cost that banks can charge retailers when consumers use their debit cards to buy things. Based on the law, the Fed intends to limit those costs to 12 cents, even though the actual cost of these transactions may be higher. Now, the big Wall Street banks, they can handle that. They're not happy about it, but they can live with it. They've got plenty of tools that will help them make up the difference. The Main Street community banks and credit unions are a different story. These small guys who had nothing to do with the financial crisis do not have that same flexibility that the Wall Street banks have. And these are the banks in Montana. These are the folks that I want to make sure have a fair shake. So folks from both parties came together and they said, how can I fix this to make this protect the local banks and credit unions, since the original amendment does not. Senator Corker and I suggested initially a 2-year delay, a study, and then more legislating to fix any problems that were identified in the study. The senators who are here today with me thought we could do better, and we could, and we did. After talking with our colleagues, we worked together to reduce the study period down to, as I said earlier, 6 months. At that point, the Fed and other regulators will decide if the rules can adequately prevent the small banks from getting hurt. I don't know what the study is going to find, and I don't think that anybody knows. If the agencies find that the rules consider all costs, that consumers would not be harmed, and that the small issuer exemption, those that apply to credit unions and community banks, if that exemption will work, then the pending rules would move forward as passed. And I will be the first person in line to tell Senator Durbin that he was right about the two-tier system. But if the Fed and the other regulators find that the changes must be made to ensure that current rules don't include all costs, or that small banks and credit unions and consumers might be harmed, then they'll have to issue new rules within 6 months. And every 2 years, the Fed would have to tell us in Congress whether these rules are still working for the small banks and credit unions. That's all we're asking for. Before the Fed's new rules get implemented, let's make sure that we have them correct. The good senator from Illinois yesterday said that this was not truly a compromise. But when you sit down with folks who think you're on the wrong track and you work together to find the middle ground, well, to me, that's the definition of compromise. Some other charges, I should say, have been made about this amendment, and I'd like to take a moment to discuss those. Some say it's a favor to the big bank. Well, it's not. In fact, this amendment corrects a very big problem that only affects the community banks and credit unions. The good senator from Illinois said yesterday that he crafted this amendment with awareness that a major reduction in interchange fees would kill the small banks and credit unions. No one denies that the small banks and credit unions would be deeply harmed if they're forced into a system where they can only charge 12 cents per transaction. No one denies that. This is why Senator Durbin tried to establish a two-tier system. Under his proposal, big banks, the Wall Street banks, could charge one rate, 12 cents per transaction. The small banks, the community banks, the credit unions, could continue to charge a percentage of the transaction, 44 cents on average. But there's a big flaw in the plan. The two-tiered system simply will not work. Let me repeat that. The two-tiered system simply will not work, and I didn't make that up. Here's what the chairman of the Federal Reserve said. It is possible that the merchants will reject the more expensive cards from smaller institutions, or because networks will not be willing to differentiate the interchange fee for issues of different size. It is possible that the exemption will not be effective in the marketplace. That was Ben Bernanke that said that. He went on to say that because the exemption will not be effective, small banks could be hurt or even fail. Here's what the head of the FDIC said. The likelihood of this hurting community banks and requiring them to increase the fees that they charge for accounts is much greater than any tiny benefit that the retail customer may get. Again, Madam President, everyone agrees that if the Fed's rules go into effect, the small banks and credit unions will suffer because the exemption simply will not work. So today we can stop and double-check to make sure that that does not happen, or we can just flip a coin and hope for the best and watch as more small banks and credit unions fail. Reducing consumer choice and reducing banking options, especially as they currently exist in rural America. These small banks and credit unions are the ones who make the loans to small businesses in rural America. They're in places where folks are still willing to put their money. They're the ones who folks in Montana still trust. They don't trust the big Wall Street banks. We probably won't lose too many banks in Washington, D.C. or Chicago, Illinois, but we will in rural America. I don't want to see that happen. Another good one that I've heard this week is the argument that the amendment will allow banks and credit unions to factor executive compensation into the cost of interchange fees. It will not. In fact, the amendment specifically states that the Federal Reserve and other banking regulators must look at the costs associated with debit card transactions and program operations. We also know how dangerous it is to set a price for a product without understanding all of the costs that go into that product. Home Depot would never allow the federal government to set the price of a garden hose simply by looking at the cost of manufacturing that garden hose. No, Home Depot charges us for the cost of manufacturing it, shipping it, keeping it in stock, having someone to tell you what aisle it's in, and the list goes on and on and on. Likewise, if we're going to be regulating debit interchange fees, we need to understand all of the costs associated with debit transactions and debit programs. When we voted on this amendment last year, we thought we were voting to allow the Federal Reserve to consider all costs. However, the reality is that last year's interchange amendment limited the costs that could be included. Some fraud costs were allowed to be included, others were not. Some technology costs were included, but others were not. If we're going to be regulating this market, we need to be fair about it. So, the amendment directs the Fed to determine what is reasonable and proportional, but it gives the Fed the discretion to look at all of the costs associated with debit transactions. That does not mean executive pay. That does not mean special rewards programs. All costs will still need to be justified. And if they cannot be justified, they will not be considered. The Fed has been very clear with me. No executive pay, no bells and whistles. But the decisions about the cost of routing networks, the cost of fraud, and other technical details are much better left to the Fed than decided by the United States Senate. Finally, Madam President, some have said that the amendment hurts consumers. It does not. As someone who voted against the Wall Street bailout, who wrote part of the Credit Card Reform Act, and who voted for the Wall Street Reform Bill, I can tell you that if this amendment was somehow bad for consumers, I wouldn't offer it. In fact, the amendment requires the regulators to certify that the Fed's rules address consumer concern. The current law does not require anyone, it does not require anyone to look at the impact of interchange fee regulations on consumers. They're out of the picture. I'm not aware of any specific plans by any retailers to lower prices or provide customer rebates if interchange fees are lowered. I know that one large box store held an earnings call at the beginning of the year where the company executive called the proposal to lower interchange fees a $35 million windfall. If I were a shareholder, that'd sound pretty good to me. But as a customer, it's not clear how I would benefit. I understand that there are some folks who wish the amendment would go further to include additional consumer-oriented agencies like the Federal Trade Commission as agencies that will conduct the study. I'd be happy to work with those senators to see how we can best protect consumers in the process. But the only way to make this happen is going to get this amendment adopted today. Otherwise, the Fed's rules will go into effect on July 21, regardless of what any consumer thinks. I'm looking forward to today's debate. It's been a long time coming, because we have the opportunity to address an unintended consequence of the Durbin Amendment. And make no mistake, those unintended consequences will be felt all over rural America, and not for the better. The folks who think that the two-tiered system will work, there's not a regulator out there that will tell you it will. The folks that will tell you that the Durbin Amendment has an exemption for community banks under $10 billion and credit unions under $10 billion, if they think that will work, there's not a regulator out there that will tell you they can implement it so it works, because the free market system will drive it to the lowest price. That's the system we live in, and that's just the way it is. So I'm saying let's slow down a little bit. Let's make sure we get it right. If we're going to create regulations, let's do it in a way that's fair and consistent with the intent. Let's not try to solve one problem and create three others. And let's not take shots at the folks in my neck of the woods who are not part of the financial meltdown. That's all I'm asking. I'm urging my colleagues to support this amendment. With that, Madam Chair, I yield the floor. Madam Chair, I would ask consent that the time be divided equally during the quorum call between each side, and then I
Without
will...
objection.
Until the vote?
Without objection.
On all the quorum calls. And with that, I ask for the absence of quorum. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
After gaveling in this morning at 9:30 with general speeches, the Senate has resumed debate on the economic development bill they worked on yesterday. Most of the focus today is expected to be on an amendment offered by Montana Democrat Jon Tester, who you just heard from. That would put a delay on the capping of debit card fees. Those caps are part of the financial reform law that was passed last year. They're expected to go into effect at the end of July. The Tester amendment would put a hold on implementing those caps on fees for another year. We are expecting a vote on that amendment this afternoon at 2 Eastern. 60 votes are needed for approval. Once again, debate in the Senate for the next few hours centered around an economic development bill and, more specifically, an amendment putting a delay on the capping of debit card fees. An amendment offered by Senator Jon Tester of Montana. Those caps are set to be implemented next month as part of last year's financial overhaul bill. A vote on that amendment is set for 2 p.m. Eastern. This morning on Washington Journal, we spoke with a reporter who offered some background on this legislation and took viewer phone calls.
A fight which is splitting Democrats. Stephen Dennis is writing the story for Roll Call. He is joining us live on the phone. Thanks very much for being with us.
Great to be here.
So set up the debate that we're going to hear later today. What are the issues and what is Senator Durbin specifically proposing?
Basically what we have is a showdown between the banks and the retailers. And the battle is over a pot of money, about $1 billion a month is up for grabs here. It's a pretty significant inside the Beltway battle that has been raging for months. It hasn't really penetrated to the average public because they're probably not even aware of all these fees that are getting paid to the banks every time they use their debit card. It ends up being about 44 cents every time on average. The debate is whether or not that 44 cents is going to go down to 12 cents. And that's what the Senate voted for overwhelmingly last year. But the banks have been on a full court press to roll that back and try to preserve that 44 cents. It's about the money. And so
I would ask that the quorum call be ended.
Without objection.
And I would ask permission to speak as one of the opponents of the amendment.
The senator is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to express my strong opposition to the Tester-Corker Amendment number 392 to the Economic Development Administration Authorization Act. The interchange debate is not a new one for the Senate. This is an old discussion with both sides, financial institutions and retailers, bringing their perspectives to the table. I should know I'm a former small businessman and retailer. My wife and I owned and operated NZ Shoes, a family retail shoe store in Wyoming and Montana for over 25 years. Retail stores have been clamoring for a change for years and have always felt ignored by the credit and card and the big bank card companies. Stores with small priced items are forced to allow a sale to be put on a debit or credit card. While some stores post signs that require a minimum purchase, they're violating their service contract. If the fees were merely a percentage of the sale rather than a minimum amount or percent, whichever is larger, much of the argument would be gone. Without the percent fees, small businesses have no leverage for negotiation. Soon vending machines will allow you to kind of point your cell phone at the vending machine and click. You'll get your snack or your soda, and it'll be billed to your debit card. But if the cost of making that purchase eats up the profits on the sale, plus some money out of the vending machine owner's own pocket, every time someone buys a soda or a snack, will the machines be available? No. You can't be in business if you lose money on every sale. Now, the vendor has an option. They can charge as though every sale is a debit card sale and increase the cost of the item to cover whatever cost the debit card company puts on your purchase. What you have right now is this hidden fee that goes to a card company. The card companies share that fee with the participating banks. Banks are now saying that if they lose that fee, they'll have to charge their customers in other ways. I'm told the average bank will have to make up about $150,000 in hidden fees that they're now receiving that customers have been paying on their purchases and don't know about it. Are hidden fees fair? I fight them every chance I get. According to the Wyoming Retail Federation, retail stores, hotels, restaurants, and small businesses in Wyoming consistently report that credit debit card fees have tripled in the last 10 years. These fees have become a major cost, now surpassing other traditional costs of doing business. This is a small business issue. Small businesses, particularly because they don't have the leverage to do any negotiating, incidentally in this case neither did the big companies, But the small businesses are paying 2 or 3 or 4 times and sometimes more for credit and debit charges. Now, when I recently traveled to Wyoming, a businessman compared his expenses in the last 5 years to explain the effects of interchange fees on his business. Gross sales for 2005 and 2010, $5 million and $5.5 million a year. Percent of sales made on credit cards, 15% in 2005, 37% in 2010. Sales in the last 5 years increased 10%. Credit card fees increased over 100%. Credit and debit card fees as a percent of total sales, they were 0.3% in 2005 and 1% in 2010. So the fees tripled in just 5 years. The retailer has no control over that. It's a monopoly. When your bank raises fees, if you know about it, you can change banks. The debit card business is like a monopoly, so when the debit card increases their fees, the only alternative is not to accept the cards as payment. But the cards have become a way of life, and they know it. The profit margin of business is too narrow to sustain these increases. This is why defeating the Tester-Corker Amendment means saving jobs in my home state of Wyoming and around the nation. Increases in interchange fees are cutting into resources that could be used to provide more jobs. During the financial regulatory reform debate last year, Senator Durbin offered an amendment that tasked the Federal Reserve, the Fed, with studying the actual cost of debit card interchange costs versus fees being charged. I voted in favor of the Durbin Amendment, hoping that it would create dialogue and a common sense of compromise on this issue. I was trying to force this dialogue clear back in my shoe-selling days. Card companies didn't pay any attention. I tried ever since becoming a senator. I've been ignored. The Durbin Amendment is the only thing that's gotten the debit card big bank attention. But did they try to resolve it with the stores? The stores who are generating the sales and therefore collecting their revenue? Again, a resounding no. They haven't met with them at all. They've spent a fortune trying to convince you that their monopoly is okay and they shouldn't have to do anything about it, that they've always been right, they're still right, they're going to be right, and they don't have to talk to their customers, which are the stores. I encouraged the banks to listen and to negotiate, but they chose to advertise and message to make stores look like the bad guys. They have spent a small fortune advertising and messaging. One day on my way to work, I came by a place where they were giving out insulated coffee cups to give this message that the big banks were going to be put out of business by this amendment. Now, as we all know too well, dialogue is occurring in the halls of Congress, but that isn't going to rectify the problem. I agree that government should not determine a set price on fees. Say that again. I agree that the government should not determine a set price on fees. But if a huge segment of the economy makes a case for redress, then it will likely fall under what I call the probable legislation rule number 3. And that's, if it's worth reacting to, it's worth overreacting. That's not a good way to legislate, but unfortunately it happens a lot in Washington, and it may have happened in this case. I've worked for years, though, to bring the retailers and the big banks to the table to discuss and negotiate interchange fees to make the system work better for both parties. It hasn't happened. And that's when we get to this reaction time. Since passage of the bill last July, there has been ample time for the banks and the retailers to work out a solution. Dialogue between the financial institutions and the retailers has to occur in order to find immediate and a real solution to this problem. The interchange fee provision is an important issue that deserves full attention and consideration of both intended and unintended consequences. But our nation's retailers and small businesses can't afford to continue delays and studies, because what we're doing today is, if it passes, is kicking the can down the road to keep the things just the way they were. Oh, yes, it looks like there's going to be some interaction there. If the big banks win today, the customers of stores lose. Following the passage of Durbin Amendment S. 575, which was introduced this year by The amendment by Tester and Corker is a standalone bill to delay implementation of the Federal Reserve rules until the impact of those fees can be studied for another 2 years. That's the original bill that this amendment comes from. A similar House bill proposed to study the debit card interchange fee rule for 1 year. Now, searching for votes, Tester and Corker have changed their amendment, so what we'll be voting on today is a study and a year of kicking the can down the road. But even though it's been changed, it's still wrong. My colleagues knew that I was not willing to support the original 2-year delay, which would effectively bury progress made on the issue. A 2-year study was not just kicking the can down the road, it was making an indefinite delay on any changes and prohibiting dialogue between parties. Now, I commend Senators Tester, Corker, Crapo, and others for working to decrease the study timeline from 2 years to 12 months. Now, as you've heard during this debate, the Tester-Corker amendment would allow for 6 months of study of the interchange fees, plus an additional 6 months for the Treasury and Federal Reserve to draft a final rule. Now, while this is a step forward in the resolution, more needs to be done to accelerate this process. Another full year without a solution is too long for merchants and retailers. Now, there's another problem, too, and that's that the Fed will still be making the rule. And you've got to realize that banks work with the Fed all the time. So banks understand the Fed understands the banks. Retailers don't work with the Feds. The Feds don't check on the retailers. So how do you think the rule that the Fed will write will come out if we kick the can down the road another year? I think the banks will have a big advantage. And what we need is for the banks to listen to their customers, the retailers, to listen and come up with a workable solution. The Fed isn't the right place for that decision. The Fed just made a decision and the banks decided they didn't like that decision. And quite frankly, for some of the small banks, there is a problem because what was allowed for small banks to give them an edge isn't ever going to happen because people will shop where it's cheapest, which will be with the big banks. So I think that the Feds did get it wrong, and I don't think that the banks will get it right unless there is something that is real to them. July 21st, the current rule will go into effect. July 21st, they will finally feel that it's real and that they ought to sit down with their customers, the retailers, and get it figured out. I don't think it's that tough. I know where the changes were that I would have liked to have seen, and I didn't represent the whole gamut, but there are a few associations that would be viable to work this out. It doesn't need to be done through legislation, but if today we defeat, if we pass the Tester-Corker amendment, there won't be any incentive for them to do anything for at least another year because the problem still won't be real. The banks don't think there's a problem. The retailers know there's a problem. The retailers' customers are beginning to understand that there's a problem. I just saw a survey from Montana, and 75% of the people were opposed to the swipe fees that are currently in place. 75%. You know, America is figuring things out faster than Congress is. And we've got to be with the people. We've got to take care of the problems that they see, especially when it's that huge of a majority. I don't like doing things based on polls, but I do like polls to give me an indication. I go back to Wyoming almost every weekend, and I travel a different part of the state every weekend, and I talk to the real people. I don't just read it in papers or read studies. And I can tell you that that 75% is probably just about right. I think it might be just slightly higher than that in Wyoming. So the banks and the retailers should get together and come up with a rule that will work for both of them, but not one that maintains a monopoly. You know, when you sign on to one of these credit card agreements, and you have to do one of those in order to be able to accept them and have the money work through the system back to you, you're not given any options. There isn't anything you can shop around for because all the agreements are the same. And if you sign one of those agreements You have to be willing to accept it no matter what the size of the purchase. Now, if you're selling a soda for $1 and you're paying 44 cents, you know that the soda company isn't making enough to cover the 44 cents. So they've got to raise their price, which gets passed on to the customer. Now, they've got to raise the price so that it covers the credit card, but it also has to cover the other sales then, because they can't lose on, there's no way for them to distinguish one or the other. They're not allowed to charge more for a credit card sale than they do a regular sale, and they shouldn't. So they build in that fee, and it's just a hidden fee. You don't know that you're paying that fee, but it's a huge fee, and it takes away some of the profits on the small sales, and that's one of the primary areas that's driving this whole issue. There are other areas too, but that's the simplest one that could be figured out. So both sides in this issue need to have a hand in the negotiating. Defeating this amendment gives them both a hand, and that's why I strongly believe that two things are needed to occur to fix this problem. One, any study shouldn't be longer than 6 months in total length, study time and drafting of the rule. And two, banks and credit unions must come to the table with retailers and merchants to find some middle ground. Now, it'd be more workable if just bankers and retailers sat down and negotiated an agreement. They don't need a study. The retailers know what the problem is. The banks know the problem better than the retailers. So all they got to do is skip the study, sit down, work it out. I think it could be worked out before July 21st. The deadline's always good. So we really do need to defeat that. It's a tough issue for small business owners, merchants, and retailers because many of our community leaders have come to rely on this interchange income. No good comes from pitting small businesses against community lenders in Wyoming or otherwise, and especially not in this economy. Bankers already know what changes need to be made. If they put more effort into forcing bank cards to be more reasonable, the situation could have been solved years ago, clear back when I was in the shoe business. And I got to tell you, it's pretty discouraged that now that I'm in the Senate, they still weren't listening too. But this bill's gotten them to listen. So no more delays should occur. Interchange fee reform was overwhelmingly approved by Congress last year. U.S. consumers don't need additional studies to tell them they already pay the highest swipe fees in the world. Delaying these reforms will delay urgently needed relief for American businesses and consumers, relief that can't wait longer during this fragile economic recovery. So today, I ask my colleagues to side with the stores and their customers. Otherwise, we'll have just done another bailout for big banks. I yield the floor and reserve the balance of the time.
Madam President.
Senator from Illinois.
Madam President, I'd like to thank my colleague from Wyoming. And our relationship and friendship has been growing over the years, and I respect him so much as one of the real voices of retailers and small business. I had an opportunity to spend some time visiting China with him and his wife, and we got to sit down and talk about their lives and what they've been through. You know the small business side of this world better than anybody who sits in this chamber. And as I listened to you talking about the solution to this problem, I couldn't help but nod affirmatively. There is no reason why we should have had to vote a year ago to establish this interchange fee. It reflected the fact that retailers, small businesses, merchants, hotels, restaurants, shopkeepers across the board were literally given no seat at the table to discuss the fairness and propriety of these interchange fees. And the point you made drives it home. The credit card networks working through the banks are charging our businesses in America the highest interchange fees, that's the fee charged every time you swipe that plastic debit card, of any country in the world. The interchange fee in Canada is $0. In the United States, 44 cents on average on every transaction. And I couldn't agree with you more. If the banks would come down out of their ivory towers on Wall Street and other places and sit down, roll up their sleeves with the folks running shoe stores and grocery stores and hotels and restaurants and say, all right, we're going to come up with a fair system. If it's $0 in Canada,
and it's 44 cents here. There's a number in between that can make sense to both sides. If that were the case, you and I would be working on some other issues rather than this one. But you are so right. Today, we have to defeat the Tester-Corker amendment. Otherwise, we are sending a massive, massive subsidy to the biggest banks on Wall Street, up to $8 billion a year that they collect in these debit card interchange fees at the expense of small businesses and consumers all across America. I thank the Senator for his support, and I know later this afternoon at 2 o'clock when we face this vote, it's an important vote for every small business in your home state and mine as well. I thank you for taking the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President,